of my background. Sorry. All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third midterm recap session. I'm Laurent, and I'm the BOSC Free Coordinator of the EHLRecap Committee. What we do exactly, we post free content and we organize Q&A sessions for students by students. If you want to check out the material and find back the PowerPoints, like today's one, you can go find it on our website after the session probably. We are a new committee since this semester, so we're officially an EHL committee since this semester. However, we try to help you here, but if you fail, we're not, it's not on us, just so you know. And yeah, we have today Alexandra, who's gonna do the recap session for service operation management. She's a BOSC 4 student, so she had the exam last semester. So I'll give you the word now.
Thank you. Hello. As Laurent said as well, if you fail, it's not on us. I wish I could say that this is going to be in the exam or not, but considering how they did with our final, I'm not sure anymore. But usually the midterm for SOM sticks a lot to the theory that's on the slides. So most of the questions are easy to find within what the professor gives us. And you have to take it with the idea that the way the information is phrased in the exam, it's almost the same thing like on the slides. So don't try to overcomplicate your life by trying to figure out what you wanted to say or anything. Normally, if you would have copy-pasted all the slides in a Word document and then command everything, you would have a pretty good percentage that would work on questions, because he uses most of the words the same as the slides. Okay. To start off with the first chapter, it's just a few definitions, and the reason I put those here was exactly of what I said before. One similar question for sure is going to pop up, and it usually uses the exact words. So, for example, in my case, when he gave us the definition of the client, nothing was changed. Where it says challenges, so in the definition of clients, the rest of them, they are usually even sorted out in the same order. So it's very in your face. So my recommendation is that for chapter 1, just to organize the information that's on the slide in a manner that's easy for you to view, and then just go through it very, very quick. Because it's a chapter that you can't really go wrong with it, honestly. The only tricky part that I figured out so far that exists is the resources. There is the resources aspect, where he would ask what's not part of the process. Like in this case, the green coffee beans are not a resource in the process of making freshly brewed coffee. Green coffee beans are an ingredient, and an ingredient is not part of resources. It can be raw materials, but it's not part of resources. And keep that in mind, because I don't think it will definitely probably pop up on the midterm, because he gave us 2 past papers before our midterm just to kind of get a grasp of what's going to be. And this question always popped up in terms of he was asking which one's not a resource. And the only correct answer all the time, it was the ingredient. So whether it's the flour for making pasta or coffee beans or whatever, it's the ingredient is not a resource. That's pretty much it for this. On the definition of quality, he's very specific on the VOC and voice of client and C2Qs. Now, the image, the diagram is actually what helps the most, because depending on his questions, he usually would like to refer to either VOC, drivers, or CTQ. If it's extremely specific, ideally it is the CTQ. So it has fruits, it's not rich, it's not cold, it's the exact amount of grams. If it's very specific, it's the CTQ. And then the feeling of the customer, or what the customer says, or the most vague, the most vague complaint, let's call it that way, is usually the voice of the customers, which means you can't really measure it. You both in the midterm and in the final, usually you do have questions on those, and they refer less to hard to measure until the easy to measure. It's usually ideally just, it gives a scenario, and depending on this, how specific that scenario is, you have to address, say if it's a CTQ or a VOC. Okay, continuous improvement method. By the way, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat, or because I can't see if you raise your hands or anything, or open your mic directly. For the continuous improvement methodology, what's a bit weird is he gives the Lean Six Sigma as one, but they're actually two different ones. Until then, you have the Kaizen philosophy, which you're not practicing it in terms of exercises or theory. You're given the definition, and if it ever pops into an exam, usually it comes under the form of gradual improvement. So unless it's a gradual improvement, Kaizen is already an MCQ that you can strike out. One of the answers. The Demise methodology usually appears in terms of in questions where they ask you specific stuff about each step, but we'll see that just after this. Now for the Lean Six Sigma, this is a bit more tricky because their definitions match, but there is a small difference that the Lean focuses primarily on removing all inefficient steps. It's a bit confusing of which one is which one. But so my only advice is that if it specifically says removing all inefficient steps and Lean Six Sigma is given as two different options for answers, just take the Lean. My presentation is not working anymore.
There, it's working now.
There it is. Okay, the Demise methodology, as I call it. The 5 steps refers to any normal process that you would find, whether in a hotel or a restaurant or a service. So what I did was basically just list all the objectives and the tools. Ideally, if you have those on your cheat sheet, the answer is from those boxes. How to say it? Don't get fooled that some aspects might appear in also in define and analyze, or just in case if he, because I've seen that in his new slides, they are a bit different. Those are from my year, but they are normally listed as they are also in the questions. The heads up a lot for the CPOC. He might ask for his definition or if it has any connection with the VOC or the CTQ. However, you should always know that CPOC is only a tool for define, and that's it. Any questions so far?
All good.
Okay. Is it loading or no? It's not moving the slides, no?
No, it's not. It's not moving.
Amazing.
Maybe I can move it. Let me see.
Now, did it work?
Yeah, I can actually also move it.
Ah, okay. Chapter 2, forecasting. There's not much to say. Probably most of it's gonna be more exercises rather than theory, but it is the trickiest part. It's one of the trickiest questions when you're asked the different to like about a seasonality or a cycle. And I've written two pretty good examples. The Cannes Film Festival happens every year, so that's depending on the season. If it's under a year, ideally it's seasonal, but it has to happen every year, not every other year. Then the Olympic Games are every 4 years, so that's already a cycle. The Football World Cup is also a cycle, in case that's given as an example. For random variations, was the hardest to, it's best to know that it's the hardest to measure and the most inaccurate, and very possibly no one uses it. You have two types of forecasting methods, and are usually the smoothing and decompositions ones. The smoothing methods are very simple, such as the SMA, the weighted moving average, or the SES. They are what says it's applicable for time series. It aims to be simple. It aims to reduce random elements, and it's for short term. And then the decomposition ones are complex, isolating. It's isolating the trend and seasonality cycles, and this is the only big difference that you have between the two, visibly or in the exam, or that's that the professor usually at least focused. I know that in our exam we had this question, but honestly it's very easy to think about it whenever you're given a difference. Just as long as you have them side by side, you can't go wrong with it. And it's good to remember that for the decomposition methods, you only have the simple linear regression and the seasonality index. That's it. The margin of error or the MSE, they're not methods, and they are not part of the decomposition side. So if I were to ask you a question about this, let me see if I can find one. Okay, so for example, which one of the following answers is not a characteristic of decomposition methods? And you have answer A, isolating trend. You can write in the chat if it is or it's not. Let's do a quick exercise like this. So which of the following is not a characteristic of decomposition method? And if I say that isolating trend is, am I right or wrong? Very good. It's a long-term forecasting. It aims to eliminating random elements. It aims to reduce random elements. Very well. And it's a simple method. All right. Well, congratulations, you just passed my midterm exam. Moving forward with the actual forecasting methods. The simple moving average, it's the easiest one. It's just the average of the number before, but please never forget that depending of the time frame that they give you, the n of the SMA, to leave in the beginning the space for them, because if it's given of 3, you can't do an average of just 142. It's not an accurate data that is measurable. And otherwise, you're also not getting the correct answers in the end. So please pay attention at what your n is. Usually, if he gives you a table, it's already set. But just make sure and double check twice that you left the right amount of numbers. If not, usually what you can do to check this again is once you drag the formula down and you arrive at your last result, when you double click on it and you see the formula, it usually has to highlight the last 3 cells. So just the 3 above. If it's not the case, then most probably you have not left the beginning spaces correctly, or you took the wrong numbers. For the second method, the weighted moving average, the most important thing to remember is that the weights, you always have to add up to 1, because normally sometimes he can give you a graph and he would ask you to estimate how would you disperse the weights along. So I can put an image in the chat for you guys to have a better idea. Just a second. Or actually, can I share my screen a different way?
I think so, yeah. I don't know. I think you can, yep. That's me.
So for example, in this case, when he asks you how you disperse the weights, the first thing to do so that you don't lose time is you verify that the weights add up to 1. If they're above 1 or if they're less than 1, then you already can eliminate the respective answers. The second one is if they're all equal, like answer C in this case here, the graph usually has to be almost a straight line. So this is unless it resembles something that's pretty straight, that's not part of your weights. And also 0.33 plus 0.33 plus 0.33 is actually not 1. It's 0.99, whatever. Afterwards, when you have to give or list your weights, the first weight that's allocated is the heaviest all the time. So that's why in the case here, we chose answer D and not 3, because whether the heaviest weight is in the middle, that doesn't necessarily matter as long as you just have to list it as the first one. And usually it stands for the most recent number as well. It has the highest weight, it's the most recent, so it's the most important basically, so it's the most accurate to measure from the beginning. That's why this takes me to my point of where it stopped sharing, no?
Yeah, and now you have to show your presentation. Yep.
No, I don't know where the presentation is. So it's gone. My point is, if you're asked an exercise on this, you have to look at the table. You have to look at the table from the bottom to the top because you have to take the most recent weight. I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, can you see the presentation, or is it in a weird view?
I see it.
No, all good.
Okay. So I was referring at the for the WMA. You depending on the number of weights that you have, as you can see in the image on the bottom left, depending on the amount of weights you leave, just like for the SMA, the first space is free. But the catch is that instead of applying the first weight to your T1 value, to your XT1, you're actually going from the bottom to the top. So your first weight would actually be applied to 152. Then second weight to 151. So from the bottom to the top. And this is always the case. Does it make sense?
2 is 0.1 and W3 is 0.2, which makes W3 greater than W2. I'm confused. So how is it possible that this holds?
Then this question is very wrong and it should have been none of the answers.
Okay.
That's a very good catch. Are those the solutions? Apparently. That's a very, very good catch. And I will correct that here. So the red answer is the correct one. Right, there's a bit. Okay. And then I apologize for this. Those are the professor's solutions, all right? I didn't notice. But actually, that's a very good catch. And the another thing that happens with this is when he gives you an exercise, sometimes he will not give you the weights in order. So he might tell you that you have a weight 1. For him, it can be 0.3. But he wouldn't call them. Theoretically, if you say weight 1, it's not necessarily the highest number. But you should know that when you apply it, your first weight that you're going to use is the heaviest one, or the biggest number, and that it applies from the bottom to the top. So if you would receive an order here, instead of 0.6, 0.3, 0.1, and he'll give you 0.6, 0.1, 0.3 in terms of weights, then you have to know that you have to change it and to apply the second heaviest weights to your middle number. Yeah, exactly. The most recent data point is time frame 10, T10, so you're 152. Whenever you apply the formula, rather than dragging down like for the SMA from the top to the bottom, you just drag your formula from the bottom to the top. Are there any other questions on the WMA? I know it's a bit confusing, but it can be the trickiest one. Just instead of thinking that you have to list them in order, just think that whatever order of numbers he gives you, you yourself have to then realign them from the biggest number to the smallest one and then apply from the bottom to the top. That's pretty much it. For the simple exponential smoothing, it's pretty self-explanatory. The first cell, you're always leaving it free. And then the second one, it copies directly the value that's above. Because it's actually more of like it has a cumulative form, more or less like in stats, if you remember. So to start applying your alpha multiplier, and start accumulating your values, for period t time 2, you will be copying the value of xt1. Afterwards, you will slowly start applying the alpha, which has the formula right on the side, and then you can drag it down. So pretty much to remember is you can only drag your formula down in Excel once you arrived at your third time frame, because that's when you're actually going to first use the actual formula of the function of the SES.
I think there's a question in the chat on this one as well.
The
quiz one.
Yeah, the image one, no? The LMS one. Is nothing constant would be the most appropriate to start with. So the reason for which the answer is lowest is because there's the least amount of change. If you look between terms 1 and 11, 1 and 10, your graph is pretty much a straight line, more or less. But there's not, so it means there's not much change. It stays between 17,000 and 19,000. 2,000 Swiss francs change or whatever, cars is not a big change. That's why it's also almost flat. The flatter it is, or the straighter your graph is, your alpha is lower and lower and lower, because a lower alpha suggests that there's little change done to almost none. Well, in that case, alpha would have been 0. The moment you see that the graph starts fluctuating quite visibly and dropping, having a volatility that's above 8,000 cars, but that it's visible and evident and obvious on your graph, then you start increasing your alpha, and it has a high rate of change. So your alpha has to have a higher percentage of that, because the alpha in the end, it's also out of a percentage of 1 or 100%. So in the case, the higher it is, you apply that to the volatility. The less volatility is, and the straighter the line on the graph is, just take the lowest alpha you can find. Does it make sense? So it would be best to add on your cheat sheet. I could have added it to the presentation. Maybe I'll add it after. The less change you have, the smaller the alpha. The higher the change, the more volatile the change, the higher the alpha. Can I move forward?
Wait, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically towards the end, because the line is kind of going back to like a straight kind of way, is it, no, wait. Yeah, so because it's going back straight, is that why it's low?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I just look at the end. Does that make sense or no?
Whether you look at the beginning or at the end is the same thing. I looked at the beginning. The end, it's almost already the end of the graph. And because it's basically shorter, you don't know if it still fits in the time period of volatility or not. Because how long you have the period it is until 11 and how short it is after 26. It's best to look at longer time frames to be able to to have a conclusion already.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Ideally, if your graph is close to being symmetric, like in this case, so you have the volatility in the middle, and then you're undecided whether to look at the beginning or at the end, usually take the trend that it's a bit longer, just to make sure. Okay. Any other questions on this? Nope. Guys, I'm just the presentation skips chapter 3 because it only refers to probabilities. And as long as you know what sign you should put when it says that it's at least or maximum number of people. There's not much else. It's pretty obvious. The formulation of whether knowing if it's a normal distribution or a Poisson distribution are pretty evident. So I don't stress too much about that one. Just pay attention a lot, like pay attention at the way he writes the formulas. Make sure that he puts the signs well and that he respects the time frame. So if it says quarterly and he used in his formula the yearly rate, then you already know that that exercise is wrong. But it's very catchy for probabilities and for distributions. Just focus a lot on the formula. Like take it letter by letter, number by number, comma by comma, because they're very, very tricky. I know that my midterm mistakes were from that. Sorry, didn't finish with chapter 2. I apologize. Now to the two methodologies that are part of the decomposition ones are the simple linear regression and the seasonality index. The simple linear regression, I think it's probably the easiest you can do. You just select the entire table and pop the trend. So you go in Excel, you press insert, and you take the bar chart table or the scatter graph table. And then when you click right, ideally you should have the option where it says add trend. And when you press on the trend, it will give you the option to display the formula. Now that formula, because it's a linear regression, as mathematics say, it always has the structure of the coefficient times x plus your intercept, which is the p in that case. And usually according to the numbers that you're given on that, you just have to calculate something. In the midterm, you won't have to do tables or display them. At least that was in my case. Now I don't know if it's changed, but if it's continuing as a multiple choice exercise, just be very attentive at the formula and take your time when you create your tables, just so you make sure that you have all the values in it. But once you get your formula out of the table, out of the trend, then that's it. You finish the exercise. For the seasonality index, it's pretty much the same thing. If you have any questions on this, just let me know, and I'll try to answer it. If not, for the seasonality index, rarely I would say it's seen in the midterm because it's quite time consuming. And if it's kept as a multiple choice exam, I don't see it ideal, but last semester proved that anything is possible since I had a triple exam on my final. For the seasonal index, just make sure that when you drag, to double check your numbers, because you might have the tendency to block certain cells, and then by the time you already arrive on your last column, you'll notice that some of the numbers did not move, or you have actually just divided everything by the same number. So just always on the seasonality index, check the percentages, check the formulas that you dragged, and if something doesn't make sense, just double check. Someone's writing in the chat. Yeah. But then this probably might not have to pop up. You can you will be able to solve the midterm by hand. Honestly, there's no problem in that. He will, what the structure usually is, you're already having the image of the table inside. And if, for example, he asks you for the SMA, for the time period 9, he gives you the image, you don't need Excel to calculate an average of 3. If he tells that you have to calculate an SMA of 3, starting as of period 4, well, as of period 7, you know that you have to take the 3 numbers above, the 3 XTs above. Does that make sense? For the midterm, honestly, Excel might be a bit time consuming to use since he gives you the picture, so you have to transcribe the numbers. Ideally, it is to use the use the calculator. And since it's a picture, just make sure that you're double checking the number on the calculator, because it's just that probably you're a bit stressed, or it's a bit harder to pay attention. Just make sure that you wrote the right numbers, because the results are often very close to each other. So if you're missing it by 1, you actually might find your answer in his options, but it's not that one. So just make sure that you calculate it twice. If you remain with time, just go through the calculations again, just to be sure. Usually you shall, for the midterm, you shall remain with a few minutes. What I use them for is just to check that I paid attention when I did my calculations, and I went again through the distribution exercises, the ones where you have to make sure that his formula is completely right. Otherwise, the rest are pretty much theory, and I can tell you that the 2019 one had 32. And mine has also 32 questions. But do you have Damien Cobel?
Yes, well, I do. I think most
For
of us.
Mr. Cobel, I think he wrote an LMS structure. MCQ between 30 to 33 questions, yes. And usually they are, you know at what chapter you are. So he goes like chapter 1, and then he lists his questions. Then he moves to chapter 2. They won't be mixed, so you won't have to go back and forth for your notes. Now, I don't want to speak for him because I don't know if the structure is changed, but from what I understand, it's not that different. I just... it's legit what us as well. Yeah, no. He mentioned the same thing for us as well. It's around 30 questions, 100%. Or he's gonna make a wider question for the process analysis, but in the end, you still have options. Moving forward, then. Another another aspect where you have to be extremely attentive is at the forecast error, because he often... Yes, Committee Entrepreneur Club. All right, for this one, make sure you read carefully if he asks you for the mean squared error, so first bullet point, or the margin of error. Because most of the mistakes that are done, and the professor actually also signaled this to us when we had our own exam, was everyone stops at calculating the MSE. But a lot of times he actually might ask you for the margin of error. So just double check the sentence. When you see that there's something with mean squared error or margin of error, make sure which one it is. Because it's another easy point that you can win. And so many times it's just a battle with paying attention and not getting very enthusiastic that the exam is doable. The exam is very doable. As I said, he's using pretty much the same words as he uses in his slides. their numbers are not there, but he makes it tricky. So, and the only thing that our job, the only job that we have is to pay attention, because we might find ourselves in quite of a confusion situation at one point, or with a bit of a lower grade than you expect, just because you didn't pay attention. And lastly, for chapter 4, I listed down the steps. The way I recommend you to do is you create a table on a sheet of paper really fast. It's useless to use Excel at that point, because it's very time confusing. And then just follow the steps. The one thing you have to be very attentive to is your duration has to match the task. But to solve it, usually I convert everything to minutes. Does it make sense? Are there any questions on this? Awesome. Then that's pretty much it. If you guys are still down, as let's say we have for another 10 minutes, and since I have the learning material that Mr. Cobel provided us on LMS, do you want to go through some questions and I'll read it to you and you guys answer it?
Yeah, also, by the way, you cannot distribute the exam, so you cannot share it. You can show it, but you can't distribute it. We cannot share it with everyone, basically.
Okay. So,
but you can solve some questions from it. But
yeah, we'll go with solving the questions. So, I'll list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of events, and you'll have to tell me which one is not a seasonality. Is not characterized as a seasonality. We have, so just say yes or no then. Cannes Film Festival. It is a seasonality, that's correct. As long as it happens every year, at least once a year, it's part of the seasonality. The Fashion Week in Paris. Correct. The World Economic Forum in Davos. The Economic Forum happens every year, just to let you know. Very good question.
And Google it.
In the case of the seasonality, yeah, Google it. You can use, there you go. Smart. Unless a different answer option is evident that's the correct answer and you think it might be that one, it's worth to Google it. Next item, the Olympic Games. Correct. So in this case, you didn't really need to know which whether the World Economic Forum or whatever event is part of it or not, because then the other option is evident. But yeah, why not? Google it. Let me see. Okay. So, is there any other? Okay. Which one of the following continuous improvement methodology, so your Lean Six Sigma, Kaizen, Demise methodology, focuses on removing all the inefficient steps and wasting time? And your options are Six Sigma, Lean, Kaizen, or Demise. Yes. Very good. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Unless you have any other questions, I think we're pretty much set. Yeah. If anything pops up after the tutoring session, I'll leave you my email in the chat, and you can send me questions.